There are wounds that never make a sound. No blood, no bruises, no bandages. And yet, they hurt more than any physical blow could. They are the quiet cuts of betrayal, the silent tears shed in the stillness of the night, the aching heart that learns to beat behind a smile. You have known this pain, haven't you? You carried your suffering in silence, not because you were weak, but because you were strong. Strong enough to endure what others wouldn't survive. Strong enough to protect those who hurt you because you still had love in your heart. Strong enough to walk away without exposing their sins while they paraded your dignity through the mud. They lied, they manipulated, they mocked you behind closed doors, thinking no one saw, and you stayed quiet, not because you didn't know, but because you trusted that heaven watches. You have been through seasons that would have broken lesser souls. You watched people you once protected turn you into their target. You forgave them once, twice, countless times, hoping they would change, but they didn't. They used your kindness like a doormat, wiping their filth onto the purity of your heart. You cried behind locked doors, screamed into pillows, questioned your worth, and pleaded with God for answers that never came. Or so you thought. But what if the silence wasn't God ignoring you, but God preparing something far more profound? There is a divine law that never fails. What is done in darkness always comes to light. And now the time has come. The same God who watched you suffer in secret is now rising to respond in public. Not because you demanded it, not because you wished for revenge, but because justice has a schedule. And your name is next on the list. Have you noticed the shift? The unease in their voices, the crumbling of the very things they once used to humiliate you. The irony is poetic. Those who caused you shame will now taste it themselves, not through your hands, but through the very hands of the God you cried out to. Do you think your prayers fell on deaf ears? No. Heaven was silent, but not still. Sometimes God allows pain not to punish you, but to prepare the stage for something greater. Your silence wasn't a sign of weakness. It was a seed, and now that seed is bearing fruit. Not just for you to eat, but for them to see. The tables are turning, slowly, surely, divinely, and this time everyone will watch. There is no need for you to raise your voice. God is about to raise your life. And in doing so, the same people who mocked you in secret will mourn their actions in public, not because you exposed them, but because God did. And now, as we move forward, I want you to reflect deeply. Not in bitterness, but in awareness. You are not imagining things. The pain was real, the betrayal was deep, and the silence was deafening. But justice is here, and it's loud. Your silence was never powerless. It was God's strategy. There is a kind of silence that doesn't come from fear. It comes from faith. And yet, the world often confuses the two. They thought you were afraid to speak. They thought you were too weak to fight back. They mistook your silence for surrender. But only you and God knew the truth. You were never weak. You were restrained. You were waiting. You were trusting a power greater than yourself to respond in a way your words never could. You didn't stay silent because you lacked a voice. You stayed silent because you had already screamed your heart out in private. You had already told your side of the story to the only one whose opinion truly matters. You didn't explain yourself to the world because you knew if they couldn't see your heart then, they never would. So you took the pain. You took the betrayal. You took the lies, the gaslighting, the blame. And you bore it in silence like a soldier returning from war, wounds hidden beneath the armor of a smile. But deep inside, something was breaking. You waited for someone to ask if you were okay. You waited for someone to defend you, to believe you, to understand that behind your silence was a sea of unshed tears. But no one came. No one noticed the storm you were drowning in. They were too busy believing the ones who hurt you, too entertained by your suffering to care about the truth. And so you stayed silent. Not out of cowardice, but because every time you tried to explain, it only brought you more pain. They twisted your words. They mocked your emotions. They used your honesty as a weapon against you, so you stopped talking. Not because you gave up, but because you knew that this fight wasn't yours anymore. It belonged to God. What they didn't know is that your silence became your sacrifice. Every word you held back was an offering. Every insult you endured became a seed planted in the soil of heaven. And now that seed is about to grow. Now God is answering with actions what you couldn't say with words. The same people who thought your silence was submission are about to witness the power of divine strategy. They thought you lost because you didn't argue. They thought you were broken but they didn't see the conversations you had with God behind closed doors. They didn't hear the sobs, the prayers, the cries you poured into the night, while they slept in peace after tearing you apart. But heaven heard it all. There is a sacred strength in staying silent when everything in you wants to scream. That strength is rare, and you had it. You chose not to fight the way they fought you. You didn't resort to lies, manipulation, or revenge. You held your ground and let God take over. And now? Now God is lifting his hand, not in anger, but in justice, because your silence was never powerless. It was a weapon they never saw coming. It was God's way of saying, let them speak, let them laugh. I'm not finished yet. While they danced on what they thought was your grave, God was preparing the stone to roll away if you need to expose them. You didn't need to prove your innocence, because the one who sees in secret is now acting in public. And he's not just vindicating your name, he's flipping the script. You were the one they mocked quietly. Now they will be the ones who crumble loudly. So if you ever wondered whether staying silent was the right choice, look again. The tables are turning. And it was never your words that would bring justice. It was your faith in silence. They laughed in secret, but their fall will be seen by all. They thought no one would know. The ones who caused your pain, the ones who betrayed your love, they thought their cruelty would stay hidden, tucked away behind fake smiles and rehearsed innocence. In their minds, they were clever, untouchable, shielded by their lies and the loyalty you once gave them freely. And in the silence of their secret laughter, they mocked the very heart they once claimed to care for. They laughed at your downfall. Not always aloud. Sometimes it was a smirk when your name came up in a room. Sometimes it was a sarcastic joke behind your back, twisted with truth and lies to make others see you in the worst possible light. Sometimes it was nothing but a smug look of victory, like they had won something by tearing you down. They thought you didn't notice, but you did. You heard the whispers. You saw the way people looked at you differently. You felt the weight of rumors hanging in the air like invisible chains. And though your lips never spoke the betrayal, your heart screamed from the injustice. How could they hurt you so deeply and still smile as if they were the victim? You watched as the same people who once needed your love began weaponizing your kindness. They called you dramatic when you cried, ungrateful when you asked for respect, and weak when you chose to walk away. But all the while they were building a tower of lies, and they were laughing from the top, thinking it would never collapse. But towers built on lies always fall, and now the fall has begun. God does not turn a blind eye to the pain of the innocent. The one who saw your silent suffering also saw their secret celebration, and he is not mocked. You see, they laughed because they thought the story ended with your pain. They didn't know that the author had one more chapter. They thought your silence meant the book was closed, but it was only the pause before the twist. And now what was hidden will be revealed, slowly, publicly, powerfully. Not because you wished them harm, but because God is righteous. What they whispered behind your back will now echo in front of those they tried to impress. Their masks are slipping, not because you're pulling them off, but because truth doesn't stay buried forever. Have you ever seen a spotlight shine in total darkness? That's what's happening now. The light is exposing what they thought they could keep in the shadows. The same people who believed they could break you in private will now be broken in public. And the most painful part for them? They'll have to watch you rise while they fall. It won't be dramatic or theatrical. It won't come with warning or spectacle. But it will come. A quiet crumbling of everything they built on deception. A public unraveling of every rope they used to tie you down. And it will be undeniable. Because God doesn't just restore. He reveals. He makes sure the truth doesn't just come out, it stands tall. They will lose the respect they once stole. They will feel the weight of being misunderstood. They will watch people turn their backs in the same way they turned others against you. And in those moments, when their laughter fades and their confidence cracks, they will remember every moment they mocked your pain, and you won't have to say a word. Because when God steps in, He doesn't just fix what was broken. He makes sure the ones who broke it feel the shame they tried to place on you. You endured what would have crushed others. Most people will never know what it took for you to survive what you did. They only saw the surface, the calm expression, the composed tone, the steady hands. But they didn't see the nights you collapsed in tears, shaking in silence, wondering how much more your heart could take. They didn't witness the way you kept functioning when everything inside you was falling apart. They didn't hear the inner screamings, the questions, the pleading, the aching for someone to just understand without judging. You carried storms that would have torn others to pieces. You walked through fires that would have burned others beyond recognition. You suffered betrayal from people you would have died for, and somehow you still loved. Somehow you still showed up. Somehow you kept breathing. Even when your spirit was gasping for air, this world has no idea how powerful you really are. Because true strength isn't in how loud you shout when you're angry. It's in how deeply you feel when you're hurt, and still choose not to become like those who wounded you. You had every right to be bitter, to harden your heart, to shut everyone out, but you didn't. You kept going. You kept hoping. You kept believing that your suffering meant something, and it did. You see, your endurance was not weakness. It was sacred, holy, the kind of strength that can't be taught. It has to be forged, forged in the fire of abandonment, sharpened by betrayal, strengthened by pain so personal that no words could ever fully describe it. You endured it all, and you endured it alone. No one held your hand while your world collapsed. No one carried your burdens when they became too heavy to bear. Instead, you learned how to carry yourself wounded, bleeding, exhausted, and still walk like nothing was wrong. Not because you were okay, but because you refused to let them see you break. Do you realize what kind of spirit that takes? People praise resilience when it's polished, but they ignore the raw, brutal reality of what it costs to be resilient. It costs innocence. It costs trust. It costs parts of your soul you'll never get back. And you paid it all, not for applause, not for sympathy, but because you had no other choice. Because giving up would have meant letting them win. And you weren't about to let the ones who hurt you see your spirit die. They thought you were weak because you stayed quiet, but it's easier to shout in rage than it is to cry in silence and still keep going. They thought they could destroy you and walk away untouched. But what they didn't understand is that some souls were built in silence, raised in rejection, and crowned through endurance. You are not just someone who survived betrayal. You are someone who endured what would have crushed others and came out still standing, bent maybe, scarred definitely, but standing. And every step you took through that pain became a step toward divine restoration. You didn't crumble, you didn't give in, you didn't become them, and that is your power. You took it all, the lies, the disrespect, the manipulation, the abandonment, and still, you didn't retaliate with hatred. You didn't lower yourself to their level. You waited, you endured, you suffered in silence, believing that God would one day speak on your behalf. And that belief, despite the pain, is why you are still here, still standing, still fighting, and soon rising. God will turn your pain into a platform. There were moments when your pain made you question everything. You looked at the shattered pieces of your heart and you wondered why it had to be you. Why did you have to be the one carrying the weight of other people's cruelty? Why did they get to walk away unharmed while you were left bleeding in silence? The pain didn't just wound you, it rewrote you. It changed the way you saw people, trust, even God. But what if all of it, the betrayal, the isolation, the heartbreak, was never meant to break you, but to build something no one could take from you? What if the very pain you begged God to remove was the very thing He was using to create a platform beneath your feet? You didn't go through what you went through for no reason. Pain that deep doesn't come without purpose. The tears you cried didn't evaporate into nothing. They were collected, every drop, every sob, every silent scream in heaven's hands. And now, the same place where you were humiliated, where you were crushed, where you were ignored, is about to become the place where you rise. God is turning your pain into a platform. But this platform isn't built from pride or revenge. It's built from endurance, from the nights you chose not to give up, from the days you smiled even when your soul felt like it was falling apart, from the strength you discovered when everyone else abandoned you. The pain that once silenced you is now the reason your voice will be heard. Do you remember when you used to ask God, why me? Why this suffering? Why this betrayal? Why this heartbreak? The answers never came back in words, but now they're coming in transformation. You will speak from places others have only read about. You will be able to comfort those who are hurting, not with hollow words, but with lived truth. You will stand before people who once doubted you, and they will have no choice but to acknowledge the power that now surrounds you. Because you didn't just survive, you transformed. And God is about to showcase that transformation. Think about it. Would you be who you are today if they had treated you right? If they had stayed loyal? If they had supported you the way you supported them? Maybe not. Maybe your heart would have stayed small. Maybe your dreams would have remained buried. Maybe your faith would have stayed shallow. But pain has a strange way of shaking us awake, and now you are awake in ways they'll never understand. They thought they were burying you, but God was planting you, and when God plants something, it doesn't stay hidden forever. It rises, slowly, powerfully, in full view of those who thought the story was over. That's your story. You are the living proof that suffering doesn't mean the end. It means the beginning of something sacred, something unstoppable. The platform God is building under your feet is not just for you to stand on. It's for others to see what faith looks like in human form. The same people who whispered about your breakdown will now witness your breakthrough. The same mouths that cursed you will now fall silent in awe. And no one will be able to say it was luck. No one will be able to say it was manipulation or performance. They will know, deep in their bones, that only God could have taken someone that shattered and turn them into someone that's strong. Your pain is not your prison, it's your platform. Your vindication will be unmistakable. There comes a moment in every wounded soul's journey when the tears begin to dry, not because the pain has lessened, but because the soul begins to rise, quietly, slowly, divinely. And in that rising, something sacred begins to unfold. Vindication. Not the kind that needs an audience to clap, but the kind that causes even your enemies to sit in stunned silence, watching what they can no longer deny. You prayed, not for revenge, but for justice. You begged God, not to punish them, but to rescue you. And for a long time it felt like the heavens were silent, like God saw what happened to you and still did nothing. But vindication doesn't come in your timing, it comes in God's. And when it does, it comes with a weight no man can carry and no enemy can escape. You don't have to fight to be understood anymore. You don't have to explain yourself to people who were committed to misunderstanding you. There is a justice that speaks louder than any defense, and that justice is now walking into your life. You won't have to say a word, because your life will do the talking. You see, God doesn't just restore behind closed doors. He prepares a table in the presence of your enemies. That means the very people who lied about you, who slandered your name, who made you feel small and invisible, they will have to watch. Watch you walk into rooms you were once excluded from. Watch you carry a peace they can't understand. Watch you shine in a grace that they never imagined you would carry again. And it won't be subtle, it will be unmistakable. Because when God vindicates you, He doesn't just fix what was broken, He reveals what was true all along. He takes the shame off your shoulders and places it on the heads of those who tried to bury you beneath it. And it's not because you were perfect. It's because you were faithful. You stayed silent when you could have retaliated. You chose integrity when you could have chosen vengeance. You kept walking forward when everything in you wanted to give up. That's what God honors. And now, your vindication is not just about you. It's about those watching, those who saw your suffering and assumed it was your fault, those who stayed silent while you were destroyed, those who watched and did nothing. They will see too, because your restoration is going to be louder than your pain ever was. What they tried to do to you, destroy your reputation, twist your truth, isolate you from others, it's all coming undone. The lies are unraveling. The truth is rising to the surface like gold refined by fire, and your life, the very life they tried to break, will become a living testament that God sees, God hears, and God answers. Have you ever noticed how the people who tried to ruin your name suddenly fall silent when your glow returns? It's not guilt, it's recognition. Somewhere deep inside they realized they couldn't stop what God had ordained. They realized their weapons were too small, their games too weak, their laughter too temporary. The most powerful part? You didn't have to destroy them. You didn't have to tear them down. You let go, and God stepped in. Your vindication is not a whisper, it is a declaration, a divine announcement that says, "This one is mine, and I have seen it all." And as your life begins to lift, don't be surprised when the same people who mocked you now marvel. They won't understand how you made it, but you will. Because only you know what it took. Only you know the battles you fought alone. Only you know the nights when giving up felt easier than breathing. And only you will understand how sweet it feels when justice finally finds your name. They thought they got away, but heaven was watching. They walked away like nothing happened. No guilt, no remorse. Not even a pause to look back at the damage they caused. They shattered your trust, tore your name to pieces, twisted your truth into a lie, and yet they laughed, smiled, and continued their lives as if your pain was a figment of your imagination. They thought they got away with it, thought they outsmarted you, outsmarted consequences, outsmarted even God. But they were wrong. There is something terrifying about hurting someone who trusted you and believing there will be no price to pay. When someone takes your kindness and uses it as a weapon, they assume they're clever. When they break you and pretend to be the victim, they convince themselves that the story ends with their version of the truth. They go around telling others how crazy or dramatic you were. They spin narratives that favor their ego and cover their guilt. They perform for the world while you sit in silence, trying to make sense of how people can be so cruel and so unaffected. But you need to understand something very clearly. God saw everything, every lie, every manipulation, every time they pretended you were the problem while they carried poison in their own hands. Every moment they mocked you, every word they whispered behind your back, every trap they laid in your path. They weren't invisible. They were recorded, not on human cameras or social feeds, but on the pages of divine justice. Heaven was watching. You were silent, but heaven heard your cries. You were unseen, but heaven kept its eyes on you. You were misunderstood, blamed, humiliated, but none of it went unnoticed. And now the same God who witnessed your destruction is preparing a response, not rooted in revenge, but in righteousness. Because God does not turn his back on the brokenhearted. He leans in, he listens, and when the time is right, he acts. The people who thought they got away with mistreating you are about to discover that time does not erase injustice. It reveals it. God is never in a rush, but he is never late. He allows the wicked to believe they've won, not to reward them, but to give them space to repent. And when they don't, when they continue in arrogance, when they treat your silence as weakness and their deception as brilliance, that's when justice arrives. And make no mistake, it arrives publicly. This is the terrifying beauty of divine justice. Those who once laughed at your pain will begin to feel their own, not through your hands, but through the consequences they thought they escaped. Their relationships will start to crumble. Their peace will dry up. The same lies they told about you will return like echoes, haunting their steps. They will lose the very things they once used to elevate themselves while stepping on you. The same eyes that once watched you fall will now watch them unravel, and you won't have to lift a finger. This is not about gloating. It's not about celebrating someone's downfall. It's about recognizing that pain has a process, and part of that process is divine accountability. God cannot be mocked. What a person sows, they will reap. And while they may have sown in secret, the harvest always comes in full view. They thought they were above consequence because they faced no resistance. They mistook your silence for defeat and God's patience for indifference. But they didn't know the God you serve, a God who waits not because he's passive, but because he's precise. A God who allows the enemy to build their own trap only to fall into it themselves. A God who protects his children even in silence, even in the dark, even when the world is against them. And you didn't fight dirty. You didn't expose them. You didn't scheme or stoop to their level. You took the high road, the narrow path, the one that hurt more but honored God. And now that path is leading to justice, not just for your sake, but for the sake of everyone who's ever been silenced, mistreated, betrayed, and then told to forget it. Because heaven does not forget, and when God moves, there are no shadows deep enough to hide in. The very ones who acted like they got away will realize they never did. Their judgment is not coming from you, it's coming from the throne they never thought would speak, but it is speaking now, and it's speaking your name. You will rise and they will watch. They thought you were finished. They looked at your broken state, your tear-stained face, your silent withdrawal, your trembling hands, and they believed the damage they caused was permanent. In their minds, they had won. They had stripped you of your power, shattered your name, crushed your spirit, and walked away thinking you would never recover. They were so certain, so proud of what they had done to you, so convinced that the person they left behind would never rise again. But they forgot one thing. God doesn't leave his children in the ashes. He doesn't abandon the wounded. He doesn't let brokenness be the final chapter in the lives of those he loves. What they saw as your grave was really your ground zero. It wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something divine, sacred, untouchable. They saw your pain, but they didn't see your process. They saw your fall, but they didn't see your faith. They watched you crawl, but they never imagined you'd fly. And now God is lifting you, slowly, silently, powerfully. And when you rise, it won't be hidden, it won't be quiet, it won't be in the background. It will be center stage, in full view of those who once whispered about your destruction. They will watch. The same people who humiliated you in rooms where you had no voice will now hear your name in places they can't reach. The same ones who laughed at your tears will see you smile in ways they can no longer affect. They will witness your joy, and it will terrify them, because nothing scares the enemy more than someone who was supposed to break, but didn't. You won't rise out of pride. You won't rise to prove them wrong. You'll rise because it's time, because what God placed inside you was never meant to stay buried, because your story didn't end in betrayal. It began there, and now your life will become the evidence that pain does not cancel purpose. They tried to bury your voice. God is amplifying it. They tried to isolate you. God is expanding you. They tried to break your heart. God is restoring it in front of their eyes. And it's not just your enemies who will watch. It's everyone. Everyone who doubted you. Everyone who stayed silent when they should have stood by you. Everyone who watched you suffer and turned the other way. They will all see. Because vindication isn't just about justice. It's about visibility. It's about making sure that the story is told right, that the truth is no longer twisted, that the one who was blamed now becomes the one who is blessed. God is raising you not in private but in public. He is restoring what you lost, rebuilding what they broke, replacing what they stole, and He's doing it in such a way that no one will be able to deny His hand on your life. Your glow will speak louder than their gossip. Your peace will speak louder than their rumors. Your fruit will speak louder than their lies. You will rise with a strength they never saw coming. You will rise with wisdom forged in fire. You will rise with a softness that cannot be broken again. They'll watch from a distance, unable to touch, unable to explain, unable to undo what they started. The same people who once had the power to hurt you will have no power to stop your healing. The roles have reversed, and not because you manipulated the story, but because you surrendered it to God, and He never loses. Your presence will become a reminder not of what they did, but of what they couldn't destroy. You are proof that pain cannot erase destiny, that betrayal cannot block blessings, that silence does not mean defeat. You suffered in shadows, but you are rising in light, and they will watch, not just with their eyes, but with the weight of what they did. They will feel the distance between who you are now and who they tried to keep you from becoming. They will be forced to witness the divine reversal, and there will be nothing they can say, nothing they can do, because God isn't raising you quietly. He's making it loud. And the message is clear. You were never meant to stay down. You will rise, and they will watch. The divine reversal has begun. You suffered in silence, not because you didn't feel the pain, but because you had the strength to carry it when no one else stood beside you. You were broken by the very hands you once held, betrayed by the voices you once trusted, abandoned in moments when all you needed was to be seen. And through it all, you stayed silent, not because you had no words, but because you had faith in a God who speaks louder than any voice on earth. Now that same God is answering. He is not just healing you, He is honoring you. He is not just lifting you up, He is doing it in the presence of those who pushed you down. What they did to you in secret, God is now repaying in public. And every tear you cried behind closed doors is becoming the water that fuels your rise. The shame they tried to place on you is being returned to them sevenfold. This is your divine reversal. The ones who mocked you will have to witness your breakthrough. The ones who doubted you will have to speak your name with reverence. The ones who tried to bury your story will now watch it be written in glory. And you will rise, not with bitterness but with peace, not with vengeance but with purpose, not with anger but with the undeniable grace of someone who was carried by the hand of God. So lift your head. You are not forgotten. You are not forsaken. You are planted, not buried. And now it's your time to bloom in full view of every eye that once looked down on you. The silence is over. The suffering is seen. The justice is here, and they will watch. Because God is not finished with you. He's just getting started.